I propose that we kick off. I'm Lisa Kerbiel. I'm the head of the Joint SDG Fund Secretariat. I'm delighted to welcome you to this side event of the high-level political forum, really focusing in on building resilience for the small island developing states. I'm sure many of you have seen the agenda. We have an esteemed panel of speakers and then another esteemed panel of those that I will moderate in a Davos-style conversation. So we're really excited to have a stimulating morning that really reminds us of the commitment of the United Nations to the small island developing states. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce His Excellency Mr. Björn Olof Skoog from the European Union. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure to be here today to co-chair this important event for the Joint SDG Fund on building resilience and ending vulnerability in small island developing states. Given the hour here, it's still very early morning, and I wanted just to pay tribute to everyone in New York who has risen early from their beds to get up and join us today. And I think that is a testimony to the importance that so many attach to this, the topic we're discussing today. I also want to say that I'm very, very pleased to co-host this together with Ambassador Webson. I don't think there is anyone with with more credibility than he has on talking about these issues. And my dear compatriot Ulrika Moder, who represents the UNDP, who does so much on SDG implementation around the world. And of course, Courtenay Rattray, I think he's joining us soon. And I want to congratulate him on his new position as representative of LDCs, LLDCs and SIDS as the Undersecretary General. I just want to start by expressing the EU's very, very strong dedication and support for SIDS and the development goals. While the impact of climate change can already be felt around the globe, small island developing states are particularly vulnerable to the threat of rising sea levels, increased climate crisis, and so on. Through our partnerships with the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, the EU has cooperated with SIDS on climate change, food security, regional integration, helping them build resilience to climate crisis and adapt to climate-related challenges, supporting private sector development, investment, and more recently, prioritize actions to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Climate change is quite literally an existential threat for SIDS and only further underscores the importance of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and meeting the Paris Agreement benchmarks sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, SIDS are simultaneously facing a disproportionately difficult recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. It has decimated tourism industries, negatively impacted development gains, and exacerbated socioeconomic issues, setting back years of progress. Most urgent now is to get citizens vaccinated. The EU is one of the largest supporters of COVAX, I'm proud to say, the global initiative to ensure equitable and fair access to safe and effective vaccines. And we will continue to cooperate and support the initiative until the world's most vulnerable populations get the vaccines they need to begin the recovery from the pandemic. In parallel, the global community must come together to help SIDS build resilience against future crises and build back better and greener. The EU believes that the Joint SDG Fund is an ideal vehicle for helping SIDS achieve their development goals and create a resilient post-pandemic future. The scalable pipeline of projects and innovative finance instruments provide an unmatched mechanism for galvanizing both public and private funds for sustainable development. Achieving the SDGs cannot be done without the help of the private sector, and the SDG Fund not only empowers local UN coordination, but also funds impactful and often innovative actions on the ground that are very much around boosting digital and green solutions and tackling inequalities. The fund is uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between impact investing and public development efforts. As a key supporter of the fund, the EU cannot emphasize enough the importance of ensuring that it is adequately funded. If given the proper resources, we believe the fund is a fundamental tool at the disposal of the UN development system to meet the SDGs, and we see it as an essential part of the UN development system reform, providing the muscle for resident coordinators and UN country teams to scale up responses to the SDGs and by encouraging collaboration amongst UN agencies, development partners, and the private sector. By placing the focus on integrated policy, strategic investments and financing, and developing robust partnership, the fund is fast-tracking SDG progress while mainstreaming the fundamentals of human rights, gender equality, protection of the environment, always looking at youth participation and participation of people living with disabilities. The support from a broadened number of member states is critical to ensuring the fund can continue its impressive work and become the transformational instrument the UN needs to help the world achieve the SDGs and sustainably recover from the pandemic. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Let's hope that today's event also helps to boost the stronger funding of the fund. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Skoog. Much appreciated. The European Union has been an early and a strong partner of the Joint Fund since its inception, and we truly wish to acknowledge that at this event. Ambassador, I'm now delighted to introduce His Excellency Mr. Walton Alfonso Webson, who is from Antigua, Barbuda, but also representing the wider group of the small island developing states. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll begin by saying I am in Antigua, early hours like New York, taking over my family countertop in the dining room kitchen area. So if you hear little feet or little voices, it's my little granddaughter who is running around. So you may hear her. So I just want to put that out there. I want to thank my dear friend Olive for his remarks, and even before I make mine, join him in his appeal at the end for increased support for this fund. Honorable guests, colleagues, excellencies, for decades, the small island developing states have been calling for scaled up development finance along with improved affairs and access. With relevant stakeholders, we are now exploring ways to overcome the persistent barriers in eligibility and access to finance, including through the development of a multi-dimensional vulnerability index, something that we have been speaking of for a long time, and it appears, and I hope we are getting some traction towards it. However, financing availability from public sources that is critical to SIDS is declining. It was estimated that over $4.5 trillion is needed per year in developing countries to achieve the SDGs. And this will exponentially increase due to the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is clear to me, and I hope to others, that the neediest, and that we need more public funding, and we need unrealized commitments to be fulfilled. We thank our colleagues in the EU for the contribution, but we continue to appeal for increased funding and support. At the same time, we also need to explore other avenues, and that's why this meeting is so important, to help us and to front load the funding that is needed and available from all sources in a manner that targeted to the needs of the most vulnerable amongst us. We have been saying during this HLPF how vulnerable small states are. and we continue to appeal. And in the fund, we appeal for additional resources to front load the need. The Joint SDG Fund is uniquely positioned to pioneer a new narrative to bridge the gap in philanthropic giving and impact investment. Trust in the UN and the SDGs are being utilized globally as a matrix in the impact investment space. While the SDGs offer a compass, the fund itself is an important instrument to operationalize the sustainable investment models that serve the people and the planet. To meet our ambitions, we need to leverage the power of the markets, accelerate sustainable businesses, and empower communities. Colleagues, I hope you will support this fund and work with us because of the unique message and the unique position of the funding to help us and help small states in particular, the most vulnerable amongst all of us, the United Nations family. I am now pleased, I don't know if my friend has joined us, Ambassador Rattray, but it's my time, I think, to hand over to Ambassador and also to the chair of the steering committee. Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, and thank you for your impassioned intervention. It's resonating around the world right now with all of the people tuned in. So thank you so much. USG Rattray is soon to be online. He's having some technical difficulties, so we're just letting him sort through some internet challenges. If you don't mind, Ulrika, may I please pass to you in the interim? And I'm delighted to welcome Ms. Ulrika Mudir, who is UNDP's Assistant Administrator and Director of the Bureau of External Relations and Advocacy. Ulrika, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and Excellencies and honorable guests. I'm really pleased to be here today representing UNDP, a UN agency, as you know, that is part of the Operational Steering Committee of the Joint SDG Fund. And the Joint SDG Fund's approach really recognizes, and we will hear this today, the potential of SIDS. The fund is currently engaged with SIDS in 19 countries and 2 territories, supporting projects in the portfolios on leaving no one behind and on enabling in the environment for SDG financing for $23 million already committed. And as you all know, on 1st of June, the Joint SDG Fund opened the first non-competitive call for proposals specifically reserved for small island developing states. And with an envelope of an additional $30 million, the fund will now finance innovative and catalytic investments that will strengthen resilience in SIDS by working cross sectors and silos through an integrated and multi-dimensional approach. And I'm really delighted also to share with you here today the news that a total of 26 proposals have been put forward in response to the call, covering 42 countries and territories across Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and the Asia-Pacific regions. And these proposals, they involve 22 different UN organizations at country and regional levels, including resident and non-resident agencies under the leadership of the offices of the resident coordinators across the world. So it is, as Olof said, a proof that we can work even better together. Now, in full alignment with the summer pathway, these projects build on the leadership shown by SIDS in advocating for ambitious climate action, in conservation and sustainable use of maritime areas and their resources advancing on a variety of goals, including, of course, inclusive economic growth, social protection, food security and gender equality, and accelerating action towards the sustainable development goals in transformative ways. The projects within the Joint SDG Fund, they will help to enhance and enable the environment at the national and regional level to attract more public and private investments in SDG acceleration, as Ambassador Webson spoke to, capitalizing on the blue and green economy initiatives. And UNDP, we continue to work alongside SIDS through our integrated SIDS offer, rising up to SIDS, supporting 50 SIDS where we are operational. And the offer commits to enhancing our UNDP's investment across 3 pillars: climate action, blue economy, and digital transformation, an area that we have seen the necessity of, with development finance as an enabling cross-cutting area. And we know, all of us on this call, that SIDS play a very important and specific role in holding the international community accountable to its promises on the Decade of Action for the Sustainable Development Goals. It is a true honor to join in this opening panel discussion, which will be moderated by the head of the Joint SDG Fund Secretariat, as we have known now, Lisa Erbiel. And with this, I'm pleased to hand over back to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Ulrika, and thank you, of course, to not only the UN Development Program, but all of the agencies, funds, and programs that are part of the Operational Steering Committee that is the daily guide and steering mechanism oversight tool for the Joint SDG Fund. We will be hearing from Arthur later this morning, who also sits on the OSC, so really delighted. Colleagues, I'm afraid Courtenay, Mr. Rattray is still having some, right on time. Oh, that was perfect. That was perfect timing. So colleagues, good morning. USG Rattray, delighted and perfect timing. We were just about to pass to you. So if you're okay with just jumping right into the water, so to speak, I'd be delighted to introduce the Secretary General's High Representative for Least Developed Landlocked Countries and Small Island Developing States, Mr. Courtenay Rattray. The floor is yours.
Good brief, Lisa. That sounds so formal. Anyway, hi, good to see you. Nice to see some familiar faces on the screen. How are you, Olaf? Listen, let me just tell you people that I had a bit of a emergency this morning, so I'm sorry I'm joining you much later than anticipated, but good to see everybody nevertheless. Participants, distinguished participants, I should say. So it's a real pleasure for me to bring opening remarks. I mean, Lisa has been doing such good work in Jamaica, and she and I have been collaborating over the past few years. So absolutely delighted to join you at this side event on building resilience and ending vulnerability in SIDS. The theme has been the common thread, I think, throughout the entire HLPF, weaving together many of the critical elements of vulnerability and resilience towards a clearer understanding of what we're all about, which is how can we better achieve the SDGs, especially with the advent of the COVID pandemic, and achieve it in this exceptional decade of action. So let me thank all the organizers, the Joint SDG Fund, for bringing us together and for playing such an important role in helping SIDS to realize their sustainable development goals. The fund recognizes, I think, that reliable and inclusive partnerships are critical for accelerating the SDGs and getting us closer to the goal, to attaining the goal of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The theme also, I think, lies at the heart of the Samoa pathway, which recognizes that genuine and durable partnerships are necessary for the sustainable development of SIDS. SIDS' unique vulnerabilities are well known. Since 1992 in Rio, the international community has recognized that SIDS are a special case for sustainable development and that we have a comprehensive blueprint for the sustainable development as SIDS, as laid out in global frameworks from the Barbuda Program of Action to the Samoa Pathway. Now, as we seek to implement these frameworks at a time when the world is facing a multiplicity of grave challenges, urgent and concrete action is needed more than ever. The events of these past 2 weeks have shown that one of the most urgent and critical issues for SIDS is how to move beyond recognition of vulnerability to concretely measuring and, more importantly, to explore the possibility of using MVIs as a criteria for allocation of and access to development finance. As we heard from nearly all the speakers at the SIDS session of the HLPF last Friday, there is a growing consensus that GNI per capita in and of itself does not adequately measure a country's developmental needs. In fact, vulnerability is not even captured through the measurement of income. However, GNI per capita is largely the determining factor that guides the allocation of concessional finance by the IFIs. SIDS are in urgent and immediate need of additional liquidity to recover from the COVID pandemic and to achieve their sustainable development goals. And yet access to concessional resources remain limited. The need to review SIDS eligibility to concessional finance is utterly clear, and we need effective and innovative policy tools and instruments like the Joint SDG Fund to lead the way. The fund is an excellent example of ways in which we can effectively support all SIDS, helping them to mobilize the resource. Let me just say, I say all SIDS because there are a few SIDS that benefit from certain concessional financing windows, and others, those that are middle income SIDS, are locked out, excluded from benefiting from these facilities. And so I think this is an excellent example of how we can effectively support all SIDS and help them to mobilize the necessary resources to get them back on track to achieve, as I said, the Samoa pathway and the SDGs. The call for proposals focusing on strengthening resilience and ending the vulnerabilities of SIDS to accelerate the SDGs provides a much needed boost in funding, which is needed to help transform economies and catalyze further support. As all SIDS are eligible, it is no surprise that the level of response has been high. It has been heartening to see proposals covering 42 SIDS focusing on a range of policy areas from the blue and green economy to social protection and food security. These are some of the key priority areas for SIDS as outlined in the Samoa pathway, and the proposals serve as a necessary step towards getting back on track to achieving these goals. Indeed, the support of the Joint SDG Fund for these cross-sectoral integrated proposals will undoubtedly lead to SDG acceleration in SIDS. It is also encouraging to see the level of engagement of the RCs and multi-country offices in this exercise. OHRLS wholeheartedly agrees that such collaborative exchanges and knowledge sharing between UNCTs and other relevant parts of the UN system, governments, private sector, further strengthens coherence in our support to SIDS at the national, at the regional, and indeed at the global levels. The Joint SDG Fund has done an excellent job in closing the loop between all of the different stakeholders in SIDS to help stimulate collective action for their sustainable development. This marks only the beginning of an exercise that has the potential to create truly transformative change in SIDS. I wish to assure of my office's full support and collaboration as we move forward. We are working on a number of fronts to address the vulnerabilities of SIDS, including through our work on the development of possible MVIs for SIDS. And we are forever strengthening our efforts to bring more financing towards building resilience and achieving the SDGs in the most vulnerable of our countries. And so in this connection, I call on all developed countries to expand the overall pool of resources, increasing their financing to the most vulnerable, and to increase SIDS access to relevant financing vehicles. In particular, I call on member states and other stakeholders to scale up their contributions to the SDG Fund to enable it to deliver more to the most vulnerable countries along the lines of this special call for SIDS. We must certainly build on momentum of this excellent initiative. And as I said, I cannot say more in support of the Joint SDG Fund and what it is doing in many, many critical areas such as digital finance, digitalization as a whole, all these sort of areas that you're helping us in. And as I said, Jamaica is one of those countries that is benefiting from the largest of the fund. So Excellencies, structural and inherent vulnerabilities require decisive action. It's important to recognize and to highlight when such action has been taken. So let me congratulate the fund in this regard, and I look forward to working closely with you all as we bring all the financing pieces of this puzzle together to advance efforts to bring increased resources as well as a more coherent and effective support mechanism for SIDS countries. So thank you very much, and apologies once again. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Courtenay, and thank you for that call to action, which really sets the tone as we go into our next panel. I want to thank our distinguished speakers who've already set the stage for now what we're calling a Davos style. So now we're flying to Davos for a Davos style panel, which is going to bring together the United Nations. It's going to bring together leadership from the field. It's going to bring together the private sector, and probably most importantly, the next generation, which is a representative of youth, and who's going to take the torch forward into future generations. Colleagues, I'd like to start with two representatives who are resident coordinators of the United Nations. Really delighted to begin with Mr. Sonika Samarasina, who's resident coordinator in Fiji, which is one of our multi-country offices. And Sonika, it's wonderful to have you here. Good afternoon and greetings to you in Suva. Sonika, as you know, Fiji is a large piece of the Joint SDG Fund portfolio. You're receiving funding from us in two components. One in the broader ecosystem of unlocking SDG financing, and that's supporting 4 Pacific Island countries, 4 SIDS, Fiji, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands. And that's really looking at financing strategies. It's looking at the different instruments that governments can align with their planning, with their wider objectives in the areas of education, health, early childhood, and gender. And I wonder, as you're thinking about that, how does that actually also align with the wider piece that you're also leading, which is really looking at a blended finance instrument, which is under the Joint SDG Fund's catalytic investments pillar. This is where we are taking first loss. We are de-risking investments around the world to really attract private sector funding. In Fiji, it's investing in the coral reefs and the blue economy, and it's looking for a pipeline of bankable projects that can actually be performance-based grants or concessional loans, really trying to pivot the UN towards the space for impact investing, as Ambassador Webson already said. How do we really join this wave of impact investing and attention to the ESGs in our world? So Sonika, handing over to you for some perspective, for a reality check, perhaps, and also for ideas that other panelists might be able to align with. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. I think it's midnight here, so it's not quite afternoon. But nevertheless, this is when we are at our best, because New York wakes up, and of course we must all be awake when New York is awake, right? But jokes apart, it's good to be with everyone, and of course particularly good to be with you, Lisa, and my dear friend and colleague Consuelo on the other side of the world. I think you've summarized the initiatives quite well. They're both, of course, very much focused on unlocking catalytic and strategic financing for the SIDS here in the Pacific, and of course on to the extent possible transformative policy shifts. So if you start with the smaller one, the component one on integrated financing, one of the things that we've noticed here in the Pacific is that whilst most of the countries have aligned their national development plans and strategies with the SDGs, and it's integrated into all of the planning instruments and the M&E frameworks, they're not often accompanied by an integrated financing strategy. So the first component really is looking at unlocking financing for SDGs beyond government sectoral budgetary allocations towards a more integrated approach of financing the national plans and priorities, as well as looking at bringing in other types of financing for the SDGs that some of the countries have not looked at. So, for example, one of the things that we are doing here is in Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, development financing assessment. One was done in the Solomons already. This is now the follow-up. In Vanuatu, we're looking at the DFA. In Fiji, and of course, these assessments we expect will help in identifying how to mobilize non-traditional financing flows from the private sector, from impact investors, from philanthropies and others. In Fiji, an interesting thing that we're doing here is to, as you know, most of these countries are amongst the most disaster prone in the world. Just in the last year or so, we've had 3 cyclones, 2 of them category 5. Back in 2016, Cyclone Winston wiped out 1/3 of Fiji's GDP just overnight. So what we're trying to do here is to help the establishment of a disaster recovery trust fund that will be completely funded by the private sector to support rebuilding and refurbishment of health facilities, schools, and other essential public infrastructure in the aftermath of climate change. Climate-induced disasters. The second initiative is a much larger one, and in some ways a lot more exciting as well. I'm a scuba diver by well, I'd love to spend most of my time underwater if the UN would allow me to do it. Perhaps this project will allow me to do it because it's focused on coral reefs. And so I find it particularly interesting and exciting from a very personal point of view as well. The investment in coral reefs in the Blue Economy Project, as we call it, in Fiji, is a substantial investment in blue financing. The blue economy, unfortunately, has not received a lot of attention or interest from a financing point of view over the years in the region. The Pacific SIDS, as all of you know, like all SIDS, comprise of very small to modest land masses, but are very large ocean states. For instance, the Marshall Islands has a landmass of 181 square kilometers and an EEZ of about 2 million square kilometers. FSM, comprising 607 islands and a landmass of 702 square kilometers, has an EEZ of 1.6 million square kilometers. So the ocean brings great wealth to Pacific Island countries, with only a small fraction of that wealth already translated into economic terms. So blue economy for us includes environmentally and socially sustainable commercial activities, products, services, and investments that depend on or affect coastal and marine resources, ecosystems, and species. And this project is founded on some key assertions. Amongst them are: one, on small islands, almost every economic activity affects the ocean. Two, long-term profitability and environmental sustainability can be aligned using best practices for biodiversity conservation. Three, conservation can produce economic value. And four, industry and communities must be engaged more constructively and collaboratively to achieve such conservation in action. So you asked also a couple of other questions, and I think, you know, I'm happy to take it in the sort of discussion in terms of, you know, how do we adapt to the situation now? You know, the economies in the SIDS are struggling. Some of our countries are heavily dependent on tourism, from 40 to 70% of GDP. How have we used this initiative to adapt to the current reality, since you talked about a reality check? And also, I think, you know, generally speaking, and perhaps there's some space to do that, I'm happy to also talk a little bit about what are the continuing challenges in terms of getting investments in for the blue economy, for instance, and where I see the benefits. Of course, one of the key benefits of this type of initiative in the Joint SDG Fund in particular, Lisa, not only because you're in the virtual room, but because I truly believe it, is the fact that this brings the best and sometimes the brightest of the UN to the table. And just in terms of these two initiatives, we have the expertise of the environmental expertise of UNEP. We have the governance expertise and the networks, the broad networks of UNDP. We have the economic expertise of UNESCAP, the social expertise of UNICEF, and the financial expertise of UNCDF. And of course, you've given the resident coordinator, me, this lovely baton to conduct the orchestra, and a degree of flexibility as well, as long as we stay within the broad sort of objectives of the initiative. So a combination of this range of expertise, the flexibility, and the ability to convene such a broad group of stakeholders and partners, I think, has made this initiative something quite unique. So I'll pass it back to you.
Sonika, thank you so much. And thanks in those final words for sort of outlining the essence of UN reform, right? Bringing the best of what the United Nations development system can bear in a situation, and also recognizing that in a world of finite resources, not all projects will go forward, right? We are a competitive fund. We tend to try to bring out the best. And Fiji, in that component 2 proposal you were just describing, was in the top 4 out of 155 proposals. So there's a lot of amazing work happening. Unfortunately, without replenishment, we can't fund all of them. But it is a note to see how the agencies can really bring their best sides to an issue and to a situation and to support government as we were intended to do. So thank you so much. Really always wonderful to hear from our resident coordinators, our sort of leadership in country. And with that, I'd love to pass over to dear Consuelo. So Consuelo Vidal is our resident coordinator in the island of Cuba. And we're delighted here for you to join us. We know, Consuelo, and I'm sure you'll tell us a bit more about how Cuba has faced severe limitations to accessing financial resources. I think that is not only, as Courtenay Rattray highlighted, with some of the middle income countries, but for other reasons as well. And that's delayed implementation of the 2030 agenda. But you do have a piece of the portfolio from the Joint SDG Fund, and it is looking at developing the financing architecture in the country. And I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how you're working with government to do that. Over to you, Consuelo.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, Excellencies. I want to also acknowledge the presence of representatives from the government of Cuba that have joined us in this session, as well as the head of the EU delegation here in Havana. He also has joined us in this conversation. Thank you for inviting us to share the experience in Cuba. Well, as you mentioned, Lisa, due to external restrictions that are imposed to the country, Cuba has limited access to international capital markets. It is not a member of the main international financial institutions, such as the IMF, the World Bank, or the Inter-American Development Bank. Its sources of external financing depend mostly on exports, of family remittances, insufficient levels of foreign direct investment, and official and supplier credits. In addition, the development of financial and banking instruments is still limited, and sources of domestic savings are restricted. So all of these factors place the country in a quite unique and disadvantageous position to access financial resources critical for its development and to continue achieving the SDG targets. In this context, innovative solutions on how to diversify and expand its sources of financing, as well as the access to innovative financial mechanisms and instruments, is really key. At the same time, as part of the process of updating its economic and social model, national authorities are open to non-traditional partners and to apply innovative financial solutions. So this is where the Joint SDG Fund came in, to support the national integrated financing framework that strengthens national capacities, analytical tools, and policy strategies to identify, diversify, and optimize sources of financing for development for Cuba. The joint program is fully government-owned and run with the participation of national institutions such as the Ministry of Economy and Planning, which is the main counterpart, the Central Bank, the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Investment, and the National Office of Statistics. 2 UN entities are implementing partners and contribute with their expertise: the UN Regional Economic Commission, ECLAC, and UNDP. At this stage, some of the results are a financial landscape analysis and strategy that focalizes in national SDG priorities such as climate change, green energy, local production of food, employment generation, and exports promotion. The mapping and assessment of 23 policies that influence development financing in Cuba, identifying their main gaps, and the development of a macroeconomic consistency model as a tool for monetary and fiscal policy making. Next steps include, among others, a roadmap for the use of the identified as viable innovative financing mechanisms for Cuba, policy recommendations on development financing, development and modernization of the financial system, including a governance framework for financing policies and financial inclusion mechanisms. So far, our joint program has facilitated the introduction of novel tools and methodologies for Cuban public institutions that have enhanced their capacities and will continue to be used beyond the scope of the project. Now, as you know, as a SIDS, Cuba faces also structural and exogenous vulnerabilities amplified by the impact of the COVID pandemic, including low-lying areas and extreme vulnerabilities to climate change and natural hazards, fragility of island ecosystems, and high sensitivity to international fluctuations. And the integrated financial framework has already identified as viable for Cuba the access to financing opportunities related to international environmental funds and the need to integrate environmental criteria into the national financing framework. So this is our proposal now. This new initiative will be a continuation of the work that is being done with the IFF, zooming in at green financing, opening a path for the development of environmental finance that addresses the vulnerabilities of Cuba as a Caribbean SIDS. It will also engage non-state actors, which the government of Cuba is currently encouraging to join forces with state enterprises. It will be highly innovative in the Cuban context, as for the first time, financial solutions will be integrated into the economic activities of non-state actors, encouraging, for example, the use of microfinance for the sustainable management of biodiversity and climate change, as well as social and economic recovery after the pandemic. Thank you.
Consuelo, thank you so much. And we're delighted that some of your colleagues and counterparts from the government of Cuba are with us today. We'll pass the floor to them later for an intervention, of course, when we open the floor. But thank you so much. I think it's this kind of innovation and this kind of strategic planning that can really be the turning point to accelerate for the SDGs. So well noted on that great example and all of that fabulous work in Cuba. I'm now delighted to pass the floor to another representative of the Operational Steering Committee of the Joint SDG Fund, UNFPA, and more specifically, Mr. Arthur Erkin, who is Director of their Policy and Strategy Division. Arthur, you are most welcome. Thank you so much for being here and for all of your support over the last years to really helping structure, guide, and direct the Joint SDG Fund. You're an active leader in our leadership team. A little bit more, Arthur, the UNFPA is leading groundbreaking work in the area of SDG financing. You have two particular initiatives that we find really exciting because they're not only showing UNFPA's leadership in innovative financing, but they're also providing new space in our pipeline of the Joint SDG Fund. One is around a adolescent sexual reproductive health development bond in Kenya. And another one is funding rural primary health care in Rwanda that is led by women who are both entrepreneurs, nurses, midwives, et cetera, making a huge impact in terms of health. Could you tell us a little bit about this? We know that they're the first of their kind, but we'd love to hear more about how UNFPA is pushing this forward. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lisa, and really delighted to be a part of this panel discussion. And first of all, let me echo first what Ambassador Skoog and Webson have said about the need, of course, to finance this fund, because we truly believe that this is the way in which the future of the UN should be funded, and really empowering the RCs to be a player in bringing the UN together. When it comes to these two specific initiatives in Africa, they're not, of course, both Kenya and Rwanda are, of course, not SIDS, but I think we can probably use the experience that we gain in these two countries to also, of course, work in small island development states. It's really, doing what the fund is actually supposed to do, which is unblocking obstacles towards achieving the SDGs, and of course, unlocking financing for that, and at the same time bringing it up to scale. And that's really what these two initiatives in both Kenya and in Rwanda are doing. Let me just start with the issue of Kenya, what we're trying to do there. Every year, 400,000 adolescent girls in Kenya get pregnant, most of them against their will, if you will. And so therefore, many of them drop out of schools. Many also, by the way, undergo unsafe abortions with all consequences to their health and to their lives. So obviously, this is the obstacle. The obstacle is, how do we make sure that adolescent girls have access to sexual and reproductive health and rights information and services? That's the obstacle we need to overcome, so that we avoid having that in Kenya. Because of course the implications of that is not just for the girl itself, it's for her community, it's for society at large. And the second part is then, well, how do we bring in the financial means towards unblocking this obstacle? In other words, how do we unlock financing to tackle it and bring it up to scale? And so what we did in Kenya was, there was an initiative already going on, which was a digital platform that's available for young women to find information and service, but information about their bodies, sexual and reproductive health, but also about where can I find services. The problem was, of course, scale. The problem was, how do we bring this up to scale so that more and more young women in particular have access to that information, and as well as within that population-based platform, access to the network of providers that are willing to provide services to young women. So here's where UNFPA, under the resident coordinator, played a lead role in bringing like an ecosystem of finances. And it's interesting, of course, you need a financer who's willing to put up the finances up front, the investor itself. You need, of course, at some point also the one that in the end is the guarantor for the outcome funder, if you will. So if the investment, it really pays off, then of course there's someone at the end of that process that then of course pays it back. So that ecosystem is not easy to establish. So you have the implementers, the ones who are implementing it, the investor up front, and of course if there is a success, there is an outcome funder for that. Now the ecosystem has been created. It's not easy in health, I will say this. It's probably easier in other sectors when it comes to finding investors, because in health you have, of course, the challenge, and how do you measure the rate of return? So the investor is willing to put in, but how do you then measure the success of that, and how that then is translated into financial gains, if you will. So that's what we're doing in Kenya, and actually something similar is happening, by the way, that we do with both under the resident coordinator with WHO and UNAIDS. It's particularly there, and of course there's an investor and an outcome funder, which is in this case FCDO of the UK, and the investor is CIF. In the case of Rwanda, similar problem, similar obstacle that you overcome, which is access to services for people, particularly the rural areas. There is community-based system around it, but of course the issue was, how do you make sure there is financing available, in this case for entrepreneur nurses? So it's kind of like a privatization of healthcare, but how do you make sure that that is being guaranteed in a system whereby there were blockages in the payment of providers? And again, here's again where you create then an ecosystem where the UN, in this case, of course, provides that leadership role, that facilitating role to bring both financiers and of course implementers together. And what is so important about this is that, why do we need an SDG fund to participate? Well, one is because, as you rightly said, Lisa, it's about de-risking it for the partners involved. That's a very important part of this whole ecosystem that you create. And two, of course, you want the UN to have also skin in the game, not just being the technical agency, but also the agency that has it in and of itself a role to play. So in both cases, I think it is about making sure that we leverage what we have to bring in the additional financing to be able to get up to scale. And I think that is such an important part of this work. Now, in the case of the SIDS, of course, what we can learn is, of course, is how does this work? You know, how does it work in the health sector? How can you create a model that actually can be replicated elsewhere? And that's, of course, very important in SIDS, because, as Ambassador Rattray already said, most of them are middle-income countries, and therefore do not have easy access anymore to ODA, for sure. And because of the unique vulnerabilities, of course, they need to attract private investment. The challenge, additional challenge for many of the SIDS is, of course, there are SIDS, there are small development island states, and so the issue of scale is a challenge, and therefore working on a similar topic, but with a number of countries is, of course, the way you create scale in for the investment. Because most investors, they don't like small projects either. They do like also big projects, and of course, you want to create scale. So here's where, of course, the resident coordinators in the multi-country offices are key to bring countries together around a similar program, around a similar problem to unblock that challenge and unlock the finances, but be able to create that scale for them to be successful. So we're very excited about it. I think it has a lot of a lot of opportunities to replicate elsewhere, and of course, with a new round of financing for SIDS, these will be examples that we're going to look at to make sure ultimately that the health and well-being of people, and for us, certainly of adolescents, is being increased as a way, of course, achieving the SDGs. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Arthur, and truly groundbreaking work happening by UNFPA and other partners on the ground. And I mean, really, when you think about the power of building health clinics that are now led by the very midwives and nurses who care for that community every day and have been doing it without that infrastructure and without that financial backing. They've been doing it for the good of their family and their extended family and their communities. And now to finally find a way to weave that into the ecosystem that it can allow them to empower themselves and give them economic freedom is really groundbreaking. It really is. Many of us have seen that reality. So well done. Really delighted to keep moving on. It's so exciting to hear different perspectives, and now a very critical one, which is from a private sector partner that has been so generous and kind to the Joint SDG Fund, Mr. Stephen Liberator, who is head of ESG and impact at Nuveen. And colleagues will allow Stephen to say a bit more, but it's very important to recognize Nuveen has been the first institutional investor that committed to the blue bond in the Seychelles just about 3 years ago. And it's no small no small feat to see the first partner who took that chance, who was really walking the talk in terms of blended finance. And Stephen, we'd love to hear this morning more about it, how it's moving, and also how we understand, many of the SIDS, Cape Verde, Mauritius, and others are looking at similar vehicles. We know that debt financing is a huge piece of the puzzle that a lot of SIDS are looking at. So we'd love to hear some of your perspective, and also, why Nuveen? What did you see as an opportunity here, and what can the UN do more of? Because obviously we need to clone you, thousands of times over to really reach the SDGs. So the floor is yours. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks everyone for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I'm pretty sure I've never heard anyone say they wanted to clone me before, so thank you. It's really been an interesting opportunity. I think one of the things that's really important for us and our investors at Nuveen is we are always looking for impactful investments. We are looking for an opportunity in the strategies that I manage, which is roughly $17 billion. We are looking for new, unique, bespoke types of opportunities that allow for us to find investments that provide the appropriate risk return for the investment, but also allow us to find direct and measurable outcome. And that's where the impact really comes in. And what was really interesting about the Blue Bond from the Seychelles is that it obviously was a critical need, and it was an opportunity to really work with very established institutions to provide that financing and to provide what we hope is really a learning vehicle and a template for other countries and other sovereign entities that are looking at trying to increase their blue financing. One of the things that we have found is that, as a public market investor, we're very used to deals coming very quickly and having them done in, less than 3 hours. One of the things, though, that is important to note in this particular space is there is more time commitment. There is a need for the ability to dig in, to work with the issuer on a much more close basis than maybe what you would do in a typical transaction. And that form of engagement is really critical in the structuring of a transaction. And hopefully what we did with the Seychelles bond was set up a true template-like transaction, because what we want issuers to be able to do is look at what has occurred previously to make it easier for them. One of the things I'm often asked about the blue bond and the Seychelles transaction because it is so unique and it was so progressive. And the one thing that I feel like I learned more than anything is that, you know, people expect that we're in this impact investing world now where everyone's talking about, everybody's trying to do it, but we're not seeing as much pickup and uptake in the blue investing as people would hope for. And I think what people forget is that the entity most responsible for marine health tends to be a sovereign entity. You know, their EEZ is tied to the specific sovereign entity, and they just move slower. You know, the blue bond, you know, took 18 months to get done, and it's understandable because when you're talking to the finance minister of the Seychelles, he had other responsibilities he had to focus on, such as helping to run a country. So you have to be patient. You have to understand that. But what the benefit that comes with that, though, is such a much more broader impact. And it's, you know, we're very used to, and we're very much used to proceeds-based investors where we're looking for that direct and measurable outcome. But you don't realize the magnitude of the impact you can have as an investor when you start looking at blue investments and dealing at the sovereign level. And I think that's really a key. And that's really what we're seeing within the blue bond itself. When, you know, the blue bond was instituted to support the Swiofish 3 program, and really the focus was improving the management of the marine area and fisheries, as well as improving and strengthening the value chain of the fisheries economy, which is so critical to the Seychelles and to most SIDS. You know, they are, as most of them are tied to the oceans, as has been previously mentioned. So it's been a great opportunity to see that. And we actually just received an update this week from the program manager, Dr. Jan Robinson, who indicated that obviously things have been slower because of COVID. And obviously things in the Seychelles, they had been one of the, you know, quickest to vaccinate and get up their vaccination curve. Unfortunately, they've had some setbacks. So things have progressed a little less quickly as than what anticipated, but roughly 20% of the project is completed. Critically, at the end of last year, 30% of their EEZ was deemed to be a protected area, a marine protected area, which is really one of the critical factors within this particular program. So progress is occurring, it's moving forward. Hopefully, what we're going to do is learn, again, a lot of different outcomes, working with various institutions, and understanding how best to do the next transaction. And I would say the best advice that I can give is someone mentioned it earlier very astutely, that institutional investors tend not to want to look at smaller transactions. That is a very true statement. I see that not only in looking at this blue bond, but in, you know, looking at the Women's Livelihood Bond series, which provides support for women in Southeast Asia. You talk to the issuer and I always ask, well, what other institutional investors are coming in? They're like, well, it's just a little bit too small. They think it's an interesting idea. So the more opportunity to make a bigger transaction, the better. But keep in mind, there are investors such as ourselves out there who are willing to look at new, unique, bespoke types of transactions. And for the critical, for what's occurring, things like the work the Joint SDG Fund are doing is critical. It really is. When you look at and I'm fortunate and blessed to be part of the Blue Advisor, or the Blue Economy Investor Advisory Committee, and the work with Fiji, for example, is tremendous. And I think that's the type of catalytic work that will bring in additional investors and will provide private market opportunities and private sector potential for investors to come in and work. Because one of the fastest things that we have seen develop really is we provide an impact report to our investors every year. One of the things that we also tie in besides our own work is we tie back to the SDGs, because we know an ever increasing number of investors are looking at the SDGs as their lens for impact. So it's so important to be able to tie back to that and be able to show the work and the progress that's being made against that. And I think it's been critical work, and it's one that's universally respected and accepted and acknowledged as a true leader. So I think the work that the Joint SDG Fund has done and continues to do is truly critical to moving forward and getting more investment and private market capital directed to entities like SIDS, who may not necessarily be on the forefront of what you would think of as a capital market participant.
Yeah, Stephen, thank you so much. I think the fact that we've been working together before the fund, you were working already with the UN Development System in the Seychelles with the IFIs. Now you're helping guide the creation of some of these structures in Fiji and beyond really speaks to the partnership that we're really trying to foster with so many asset managers like yourself. So we really value your frank and candid feedback and how to really ensure that we maintain the attractiveness of what we're doing. And I do think we're all seeing that tidal wave of attention now towards ESG, towards platforms. Yesterday there was an NTF launched that was, aligned with a famous artist, for example. There's lots of ways that I think we can really look at products and vehicles going forward. So we really will rely on you more and more. So please don't go anywhere, and we'll try to keep raising the level of how we can do this in so many countries that are on the line and beyond. So thank you.
And we really look forward to continuing to look at new and different transactions. And the other thing I probably should have mentioned that's really important, critical for private market investors, we have expertise in impact investing, but we do not have the local knowledge and expertise that the various components of the UN can bring to bear in these evaluations and in these transactions. And the access to specialist knowledge, expertise, skill is so critical for us as an investor, because we're really looking to lever that. And that's been another great opportunity that we've seen through, working with the Joint SDG Fund. Thank you.
No, I mean, imagine after 75 years of being the boots on the ground in countries around the world, we're really trying to monetize that, so to speak, right? There's a value in having that local context, that understanding. That's what feasibility studies, millions of dollars are spent on every day, really exploring that context and understanding the possibilities. So I think we're finding a really great marriage there between what so many dedicated UN staff around the world can really bring to the impact investing community. So well noted, Stephen. Thank you so much. I don't want to say I saved the best for last, but we did. There is no doubt. Youth advocates from UNICEF and around the world are always a highlight of any event we do. And today is no exception. I am delighted to introduce Miss Ashley Lashley, who is the UNICEF Youth Advocate for the Barbados. Ashley, welcome. And today we're going to ask you, Ashley, to talk a little bit about the HEY campaign. This is a campaign against climate change. It's for health. It's for really bringing youth and children together to advocate for, not just economic growth, but, promoting life and dignity and all the rest. So we'd love to hear about the Say Hey campaign and how can we join? How can we join your campaign?
Well, thank you, Lisa. His Excellencies and Her Excellencies, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted that I was given an opportunity to join this distinguished panel today to focus on the theme building resilience and ending vulnerability in small island developing states. After hearing the previous speakers today, I am happy, even before I begin my presentation, that my speech will mimic everything that they have presented. So to answer your question, madam, this COVID-19 pandemic has suspended the lives of children and their families and exposed the vulnerabilities of developing countries around the world. Progress made has gone backwards, in particular for the most vulnerable and marginalized communities. And what I have witnessed firsthand through being a young activist in Barbados is that our children's educational development has been severely compromised, and a further threat to our children's education is due to the many environmental challenges that we're facing, including hurricanes, dengue fever, and the Saharan dust, amongst others. I personally believe we young people continue to take actions as agents of change and to be part of the solutions to recover for a more sustainable, fair, and greener future for us. So to mitigate against these unplanned and catastrophic health and environmental events amid the pandemic, and in order to influence the decision-making and planning processes of climate action, I started the Global Hay Campaign, which stands for Healthy and Environmentally Friendly Youth. It was started in the Caribbean, but now it has a global reach with youth between the ages of 9 and 27, all taking proactive measures to advocate for more healthy and environmentally friendly societies. Some meaningful and successful activities that we have implemented within HAY includes youth dialogues between HAY ambassadors and youth from Sierra Leone, Bolivia, Turkey, Ivory Coast, and amongst others, where we initiated networking opportunities for HAY ambassadors to discuss issues all relating to climate change in the context of their countries. We also initiated the Global Youth Network Summit on Climate Change and Health, and this summit was organized in collaboration with UNICEF and the Children's Environmental Rights. And this brought experts from around the world together to discuss and examine the health impacts of climate change and seek solutions to tackle these multidimensional problems we are facing as citizens of this planet, particularly in small island developing states and among most vulnerable countries and all other member states, with a recommendation report for what was discussed. These summits are really important because we as young persons get to engage in intergenerational dialogues and learn from different experts in their respective fields. Our ambassadors also came together and mobilized a global youth appeal on climate change and health, and today it has accumulated approximately 300 signatories. We then partnered together with 2 universities in the Caribbean called the University of the West Indies and St. George's University with UNICEF Eastern Caribbean. I released a student declaration on climate action entitled "The Climate is Changing, Why Aren't We?", which is another strong call to action from young people in the region. We then initiated a global HAY Parliament focused on providing unique and robust solutions from each sitting to formulate policies, recommendations, and exchange ideas on all issues and matters relating to climate change and health. And these are just a few activities that as young persons within HAY that we're initiating within our respective countries. And the success of these youth-initiated activities are influencing the decision-making and planning processes of climate action amid the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you, Lisa.
That's awesome, Ashley. Thank you so much. Wonderful to hear the details of how you're really bringing together young people to speak out against climate change and to really acknowledge some of the issues that will face all of us, but that we really look to your generation in a way to move forward for us. That is a perfect way to now open the floor. It's motivating, it's demanding change, it's a call for action. We're now going to open the floor to anyone from our distinguished guests, and I think we'll first pass the floor to Ms. Sussit Rosales Vasquez. Ms. Vasquez is the Director of Strategic Planning from the Ministry of Economy and Planning of Cuba. So Ms. Vasquez, if you're still available, the floor is yours. Feel free to, I think you can open your microphone. There you go.
Muy buenos días a todos. Agradecemos la oportunidad de poder participar en este evento y compartir muy brevemente la experiencia de Cuba en la implementación de este fondo ODS. Represento a una de las contrapartes nacionales que conduce el programa conjunto del Ministerio de Economía y Planificación de la República de Cuba y estamos muy satisfechos con los resultados que hemos ido obteniendo hasta la fecha con la implementación de este fondo. Resaltamos el valor y la importancia que tiene, que reviste este tipo de mecanismo de financiamiento en apoyo a las prioridades nacionales y también a la Agenda 2030, buscando nuevos modos de hacer frente a los desafíos que todos, tenemos presentes relacionados con el tema de la financiación del desarrollo y en concreto la financiación sobre los ODS. Constituye para nosotros una aproximación innovadora al tema de la financiación al desarrollo, permitiendo alinear y potenciar las diferentes fuentes de financiamiento a nuestras prioridades nacionales identificadas en nuestro Plan Nacional de Desarrollo hasta el 2030 y también, por supuesto, alineados a la Agenda 2030. Tiene como fortaleza que nos ha permitido integrar como un todo articulado el proceso de planificación, el sistema de monitoreo, el diseño de estrategias de financiamiento, los mecanismos de coordinación entre los actores y los sectores, con alcance nacional, pero no solamente con esta mirada, sino también con una mirada desde lo local y con un efecto acelerador, lo que nos permitirá ir superando obstáculos y también ir identificando nuevas oportunidades, nuevas potencialidades de financiación en este complejo escenario internacional. También nos ha permitido poner el foco en las políticas integradas, en las inversiones, en los financiamientos estratégicos e ir dando soluciones. Esto también es muy importante. En la medida que avanzamos en cada una de las tareas que tenemos identificadas en este programa conjunto, hemos ido dando soluciones que analizan las diferentes fuentes de financiamiento, los destinos, los diferentes actores involucrados, los instrumentos, las tendencias actuales de financiamiento al desarrollo y alinearlos con los ODS, mejorando la disponibilidad y el manejo de recursos necesarios para financiar el desarrollo sostenible. Al mismo tiempo, también esto es otra de las grandes fortalezas que tiene la implementación de esta experiencia, es la consolidación o el fortalecimiento de las alianzas entre los diferentes actores, el fortalecimiento también de las capacidades técnicas del país, poniendo a disposición de todos los participantes en este programa de los conocimientos, buenas prácticas, experiencias, instrumentos innovadores, metodologías, mecanismos que aseguran una mayor disponibilidad y eficiencia en las fuentes de financiación. También nos ha permitido fortalecer las capacidades institucionales de cada uno de los organismos y entidades que están integrando este programa, y también la coordinación en la implementación de políticas de financiamiento que generan un mayor impacto en el desarrollo económico y social del país. Por último, y no menos importante, también son muchas las salidas que hemos venido dando ya con el programa conjunto y las próximas que tendremos que ir dando, pero también nos ha permitido el fortalecimiento de las capacidades estadísticas en las mediciones y en el seguimiento a los ODS. Y cómo también vamos integrando todas las iniciativas que se están desarrollando en el país para también implementar, ¿no?, la Agenda 2030 y los temas relacionados con el tema del financiamiento. Nuevamente agradecer la oportunidad de poder compartir esta experiencia que ha sido muy positiva, está siendo muy positiva para el país y de gran utilidad para nuestro desarrollo. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Señora Vasquez. I think your intervention really underlined the criticality of government leadership, government ownership of any partnership with the United Nations and with the Joint SDG Fund. We require that for any application that comes into the Fund Secretariat, and the Steering Committee really values that, as does our Deputy Secretary General Mina Mohammed, because we want to ensure that any move forward to accelerating the SDGs is very much in lockstep with government leadership. Colleagues, this has been a strong panel of such great perspectives, going from the broad brush of how innovative planning and budgeting can influence change, then into some of the specifics in the healthcare realm, which is a huge part of the SDGs with trickle-over effects, a little bit about how blending with the private sector leaders in this area can really be the accelerator. And then of course, you know, the voices who can ensure that we're all unifying around a common cause, which Ashley so eloquently shared with us. So I know that we have His Excellency Ambassador Webson in the wings, so to speak. So without further ado, Ambassador Webson, I'm delighted to invite you to say some closing remarks. Your leadership has also been one that we've really valued as we developed this call. So I also want to acknowledge your leadership and that of your counterparts, the ambassadors of the SIDS, who've really leaned in to be allies with the fund as we were preparing this launch. We know that 30 million US is only the beginning, and we really hope that events like this morning will take us forward. So Your Excellency, I pass over to you to close the meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your kind words. You have heard, esteemed colleagues, I want to thank you for being with us today. You have heard from a number of our presenters You have heard the work that is being done. You have heard the need that is still out there. And there's no doubt that as small states, all of us, not some of us, but all of us are in great need for the support and for the development of this fund, the unique and new process that this fund is leading on is a very special way in helping quickly small states to respond and to be able to address the issues that we face. We have spoken often about our challenges. We have spoken often about the need for an opportunity for the UN system to respond speedily, nimbly, and this fund offers such an opportunity. We hope that you have caught from the presentations a glimpse of the transformative nature of the Joint SDG funds. The fund itself, we want you to know that the Secretariat is at your disposal to further discuss this and discuss how you can join the fund of the fund as a donor and as a champion of the SDGs. This is critical. We want to expand this. We want others who have not in the past donated. You heard from Stephen that they experienced. We know that some private funders want large projects, but the reality is we are small islands, and in some cases, led by our governments and the resident coordinators, we are able to pool resources and ambition that fits the regions and come together. In other cases, as small island states with our own directions for our progress, we will seek individual private donor support. So we ask you to work with us and to assure you that through this fund, the opportunity is ripe, and we will, working together, achieve the SDGs despite the setback. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. We look forward to continuing this conversation. I thank you.
Fabulous, Your Excellency. Thank you so much. And colleagues, final word to echo the Deputy Secretary General in making the impossible possible. That is our call to action in this decade for acceleration of the SDGs. Thank you so much for either the very late, Sonica, special thanks to you in Fiji for being with us well into the next day, and for all of you for giving us your time, but more importantly, your commitment and passion to really making our efforts in the small island developing states matter, and to really grow them and expand them. So again, thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. All the best, stay healthy, stay well, and happy summer. Take care.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.